1. All right. Just making, I'd have to say it again for the recording. We are going to be writing our 3 paragraphs about our sources that we've found so far. We're going to be writing about the author's biography. We're going to be writing about the cultural context. We're going to be writing about the historical context. So we're going to, that's going to be your assignment, is to get those 3 paragraphs written and in. And then we're going to be finding our last 2 sources. Okay, and we're going to share what we're finding in discussion board again, just so that we can help each other a little bit, and then we'll and then that's all we'll need to do. For this one, I'm not going to make you find sources for all of the pieces. I'm going to make sure that we have coverage though. So you're going to be finding literary sources for 2 pieces. And then I'm going to make sure that everybody's covered so that we have, where it's not just everybody doing 1 author or 2 authors, and then the students who are brave enough to do another author are on their own. So we're just going to kind of divide that up today, and we'll make sure you know who you're finding literary sources for. Okay, so first I'm going to do a screen share, and
I couldn't hear what you said.
Siri is talking to me, but I'm not talking to Siri. All right, I'm going to do a screen share and get us in Blackboard together just to take a look. And I'm actually going to move some content here, so bear with me for a second. So here we are in our weekly assignments, and I'm going to move something down to this week that's not in this week yet. Okay, so we're in week 10, but I think it was in week 7. Nope. Yep. Okay. All right. So I'm moving these, and it takes a second because it's a pain in the butt to move things. See what I mean? Pain in the butt to move things. Get in there. Get into week 10. I love Blackboard Ultra. It's so awesome, except it's not. Yeah, it didn't go. I'll get it in there though. Let's see, week 8, and then the link to the Alabama Virtual Library. So we're going to work with the Alabama Virtual Library, and we'll get those into week 10 here in a minute. So what I'm actually going to do right now is just go to the Alabama Virtual Library link and show you how it works. Okay. Hopefully it'll all work out. We are recording here. So this is what it looks like when you first go to the link. Looking at this screen, somebody tell me what I click on next. Yes, college and university, fantastic. Okay, so now we're looking and we see Academic Search Premier, Access Science, Alabama Mosaic, eBooks, ProQuest. We're looking at these things. We're going to try to see what we can find. We don't want, okay, are you seeing something that talks about literature? Macy, tell me what I'm clicking on. Yes. Okay. So we don't need to do the Tweens author series. We're going to actually go ahead and do the Gale Literature. Okay. So in this database, we just get to do a search. So I'm going to do some searches and you're going to take some notes. Because, and I'm going to tell you this too, the video that I have going over this, the how to find sources in AVL, goes through the searches that you're going to need and turns up the sources that you're going to need to find. So it's really coaching. Please watch the video. But let's do Alice Walker and everyday use, and just see what that turns up. Ah, okay. Now, we have a couple of things here, and we've got to take a look at them and see what we have. Now, one of the things you're going to need to get in touch with right now is your dictionary using self, because I don't want you using an article that called heritage and deracination in Alice Walker's Everyday Use if you don't know what deracination means. Okay, so what do we do with that? How do we find out what deracination means? Even better, we go to a dictionary and we look it up in the dictionary. But yeah, we need to make sure that we're understanding the words that we're reading. And when you're reading literary criticism, there might be a lot of terms that you need to look up. This is going to be heavy reading. Now, let's look down through some of the other choices. We have one on everyday use, but it looks like it's talking about its restrained quality and maybe not. Now, personal names and heritage looks like it might be very useful, especially if you're talking about Wanjero and her renaming herself. It takes two to read Alice Walker's Everyday Use, So we have fight versus flight, reevaluation of D in Alice Walker's Everyday Use, hyphenated identity in Good Country People in Everyday Use. So we have a lot of sources there for you to choose from, and you need to kind of browse through and see. Okay, now the other one I'm going to search for next is Ralph Ellison. And now watch what I type, y'all, because the story that we read is one chapter in a novel. And you've got a choice between the poem and the novel. So we want to choose the novel. And we want to take a look. Now there's 239 choices here, so make sure that you do sift through them carefully. We don't want to do this. It doesn't look like it has anything to do with what we're talking about. Now, Invisible Man and African American radicalism in World War II, maybe not. Invisibility embraced, the abject as a site of agency in Allison's Invisible Man. That sounds good, but I know what all those words mean. So make sure that you know what all those means. Again, we have something about the aesthetics of invisibility, which I'm not sure you really want. Plunging. There's a lot to go through here. Eloquence and Invisible Man might be a really good one. But for this, you really do need to, the burden of sin. I'm not sure if that's going to match what you're talking about. But remember, there are 5 pages of these. Okay. So the other thing that you might do is instead of typing Invisible Man and Ellison, you might type in Invisible Man and voice. If you're thinking about that, race, organization man, Invisible Man, eloquence and Invisible Man, reconsidering. Don't do an overview. Please don't choose an overview. Invisibility, interiority, and temporality might have some things. Knucklebones and knocking bones, the accidental trickster, might be a good one. So you are going to have to kind of scan these and look and see if what they're talking about is helpful to you. Okay, but remember with Ellison, you're looking for Invisible Man. Okay, Amy Tan and let's see, Two Kinds. Let's see what it turns up if we just search by the story name. We have Contradiction in Culture, revisiting Amy Tan's Two Kinds. Overview, don't pick the overviews, y'all. Those are not what we want. Only two kinds of daughters, the inner monologue in the Joy Luck Club. Now, remember, this is part of, two kinds is part of the Joy Luck Club. So if it says Joy Luck Club, you can use that. Don't forget that you can use that. The things that coming up, choosing hope and remaking kinship, Amy Tan's The Joy Luck Club, you can use that, but remember not to take the quotes from that out of context. If they're not specifically talking about the issues that come up in two kinds, then you're going to want to probably stick with this contradiction in culture, revisiting Amy Tan's Two Kinds. But you could also do Amy Tan and motherhood and see what you get there. So Sugar Sisterhood, the beginning is hers. And you can find some of these other things if you do, see, this one might be really neat. The daughter text, mother text, matrilineage, and Amy Tan's Joy Luck Club. And remember, our story is part of that longer novel. Does that make sense? Okay, so you have some here. Now let's check Gilman. Okay, so we want to do Charlotte Perkins Gilman and not the shadow of racism and not the overview. Managing madness in the yellow wallpaper might work. Reader text and ambiguous referentiality might work. Who is Jane? The intricate feminism of Charlotte Perkins Gilman might be good. Don't do queering the yellow wallpaper. You're not going to understand that, please. Don't get too weird here. Stick with your thesis. Your thesis is a plain one, right? So the other thing that you can talk about is Charlotte Perkins Gilman and the rest cure. Don't forget that you can use those additional terms. Again, not the overviews, not the oh my heart private poetry, but you can look at the intellectualism here, restraining order, the imperious anti-violence of her work. Gilman and the yellow newspaper, not so much. Reconfiguring vice might be an interesting one, but again, we pop up that who is Jane piece, right? So you can use this pretty easily. I've gone in that video, I go in and I found, there are some other searches that turn up some other things. So there are biographies here, literary criticism 83, and it's showing us those 83. And you don't want to choose these other things right now. We have biography, we have topic work and overviews and reviews and news. We want to get to those literary criticism arguments. Okay, so make sure that you're sorting by that. Okay, now I am going to show you also a couple of sources in the Lawson Library. So I'm going to show you that as well. So I'm going to go to the Lawson website. Can you see the Lawson website? Sometimes it doesn't, the screen share doesn't work when I move to something different. Is it with you still? Okay. So when you're trying to go to the Lawson Library, you click on Library Services and you wait. And you click on log into the databases here, and there is a login. For the login here, you're just asking, like, I think it's not asking me to log in yet, but let's say if I go to B for Bloom's Literature, which is what I want to go to, there may be a sign in, right? So let me show you that sign in information, and then I'll go ahead and sign in for us. It asks you for your student number or your date of birth, and then to enter your date of birth. And this should work for everybody. If it doesn't, I can't help you. You got to get on a live chat with the librarian, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So I'm just going to pause the share here for a second while I enter my information. Yep. Sharing again. All right, are you with me? Are we in the live? We're in now. What we're in right now, I'm going to move you again. What we're in right now is a database called Bloom's Literature. So in AVL, we were in Gale Literature. And I believe Lawson's Library also has Gale Literature, but I want to remind you that if you're having trouble accessing the databases because your username or password doesn't work, just go to AVL, okay? All right, so again, we go to Bloom's Literature and we're just doing keyword searches. So we want to do Gilman and rest cure and see what that turns up. Showing results for literary criticism. I'm not loving what I see here. Essay topics, unnamed narrator. I don't like these at all. All right, so let me get to thematic or structural analysis. I'm still not loving these. Criticism, Gilman and yellow wallpaper. You know, I don't like these. I'm not gonna have you use the Bloom's Literature. I want you using AVL if you can. I was double checking it because sometimes Bloom's Literature has good things, but that was showing you some kind of inferior results there, and let's not muddy the waters. Let's check and see if they do have Gale Literature here in the library. Gale. No, I'm seeing green files. Let's check literature. Literary sources in AVL, literature criticism for AVL. But again, this is the Alabama Virtual Library, which I gave you a direct link to. So you don't have to go through the database unless for some reason, and here we are back in exactly what you were seeing before, okay? So you can get to, I would go through the Alabama Virtual Library. So I'm actually gonna get us back to the Alabama Virtual Library here for a second. Right, so I'm going to get back to, hold on, our course, click on that Alabama Virtual Library link. The link should take you straight to the Alabama Virtual Library, and you scroll down and you get to the Gale Literary Index or the Gale Literature. I'm clicking on Gale Literature. Okay, so once in the Gale Literature, you're using those search terms that we were looking for before. Does that make sense? How many of these do you need to find for your author? 2. Okay. All right. I'm going to go through and quickly make a note about who everybody's writing about. So I'm going to stop the share for a minute. Okay. Jada, who are you researching? Walker. Okay. Tiara, who are you researching? Gilman. Okay. Asia, who are you researching? Ellison. Great. Amelia, who are you researching? Gilman. Great. Soon, who are you researching? Gilman. Great. D'Angelo, who are you researching? Ellison. Great. Okay. Katera? No. Emily? No. Riley, who are you researching? Amy Tan. Okay. Hannah, who are you researching? Gilman. Okay. Macy, who are you researching? Okay. Great. Dejanay, who are we researching? Ellison. Great. Frankisha, who are you researching? Gilman. Great. Maytrell? Not here. And Daniel, who are you researching? Allison. Okay. So here's what I want to have happen. I want everybody, first of all, to find 2 sources for the author that you are working with. Okay, so this is for discussion board this week. So from AVL, you're finding and posting the link to 2 sources for your author. Okay, and then if your last name starts with A through M, you're going to find 1 source on Amy Tan. And if your last name starts with M through Z, N through Z, you're going to find 1 on Walker. Just 1. Okay? Does that make sense? That splits our class pretty much down the middle. And that means that the folks who are working with Amy Tan and Alice Walker also get some help, even though most of us are working with Gilman or Ellison. Does that make sense? Fantastic. Okay. All right. What do you need help with? You were working on your close reading last week. This week, we're working on our source paragraphs. What do you need help with for that? Let me respond to you. Yes, sir. Because we'd forgotten about it for a week. Maybe, maybe not. I think I'm going to look at what you've written so far and see what help it needs, and we'll just take it from there. But you'll have feedback on that either tomorrow or Thursday on what you've written so far. Okay? All right. Other questions? That was a good one. All right, let's talk about the paragraphs for cultural context and historical context first, because those are a little bit easier. Remember, every source paragraph starts out with a topic sentence. So your topic sentence is always about the thesis of your essay, right? So if your essay is arguing that there's a rift between the mother and the daughter, then you have to say, you know, there were some cultural differences that were causing this rift between the mother and the daughter. And then you start talking about the culture, you know, say, you know, you've got Chinese immigrants in the 1950s and Chinese families, and then you've got an American daughter of the 1950s who's growing up as a 1950s American teenager. And they're clashing. Here's what we know about Chinese American families at this time, and then dive into your cultural context research. Okay. When you're talking about the history, again, that topic sentence just says the history that the characters are set in is important to understanding your thesis about the characters, right? Asserting that what we learn about the history helps us understand the characters, and then you dive into talking about the history. Now, the biography might be the hardest part, but it's also the one I would probably put first. If I were organizing this, I would probably go close reading, biography, cultural and historical context, literary criticism. I'd probably organize it that way. But the biography is tricky, because nobody needs to have a background on Alice Walker that tells us all the things she wrote. That doesn't really help, right? It might help to know a few of her really famous things. It would help for us to know that Two Kinds was part of the Joy Luck Club, and that Battle Royale was a chapter in Invisible Man. Those things would definitely help. It would help to know when they were writing. right? When they lived and when they were writing. But after that, we want to start picking details about the author's life that shape this piece, right? So, right. And that's a little trickier, right? We don't want to know just anything about Alice Walker. We want to know Alice Walker's interest in African American history and Alice Walker's interest in women's history, right? We don't want to know Charlotte Perkins Gilman's whole life history. We want to know about her dealing with the rest cure, right? Specifically, right? With Ellison, we don't need to know where he went to college necessarily. We need to know why he's interested in writing what he writes in Invisible Man or in Battle Royal. What experiences has he had? Who are his influences? Is he influenced by other writers who write about some of the same stuff, right? Those are the kinds of details that we want to pull out of the biography for this paragraph. Does that make sense? Okay, have you started reading those? Okay, it's time. It's time to start reading those. Where are the lists of approved sources? Are those in week 8, I think? Those are in week 8 or week 9? They're in week 9. Do you, just by show of hands, do you need me to move them to week 10? I don't mind moving them to week 10. If you're working with them this week, it might make sense to have them in this week. Do you want me to move them to week 10? Okay. Okay. Just to make things easier, I'm going to make sure that everything you need for this week is in this week. Okay. I think that'll just make it easier. We were working on them on that week and they got put together in that earlier week, but I'm going to move them up to this week since this is when you need to read them, access them, and write about them. Okay. So I'm going to move those approved source lists into week 10. Okay. Along with your link to AVL. And the discussion board and the assignments. Okay. Okay, so there's two different sets. There are going to be, let's go over our requirements for this essay. We have to use 5 different sources. Okay, so on the approved source list, you have sources for your biography source, your cultural context source, and your history source. When you go to AVL, you're finding those last 2 sources, and those are both literary criticism. That's a great question. Okay, so you're finding your last 2 sources this week, which are your literary criticism sources. Yeah, you're trying to find the sources that support the thesis that you have. And remember, I kind of forced you into these theses because I knew you could find stuff supporting them in AVL, right? So you should be able to find that. All right. Now, I am going to tell the folks who are working on Gilman that Gilman herself writes about the rest cure. And you are welcome to find what Gilman wrote about the rest cure. So you can type in Gilman and rest cure and see what she wrote about it specifically when she was not writing about fictional characters. And you're welcome to use that primary text as one of your literary criticism sources. Similarly, Alice Walker has written a piece called In Our Mother's Gardens. And you may use In Our Mother's Gardens to talk about Alice Walker's sense of African American women's history for this literary criticism. Okay, so just helping you out with that to let you know that those are out there and that you can find them. You do need to find them through one of our databases, though. Does that make sense? Okay. So I think Gilman's is called Why I Wrote the Yellow Wallpaper. I think that's the title of it. And you can find that and use that. Okay. I think Ellison has the most literary criticism written about his piece, but remember it's written about Invisible Man, because Battle Royale is a chapter in Invisible Man. So make sure you write that down and that you're not trying to search for Battle Royale, because you won't find as much. That's a chapter in his novel Invisible Man. So it's going to be hard to find stuff just on Battle Royale. Okay? All right. Questions about the research this week? Yes, sir. D'Angelo, go ahead. And then the next person. That's okay. When you're writing, I think I get it. When you're writing your source paragraphs this week and you're talking about the biography of the author and the cultural context and the historical context, you should quote each of those sources 2 to 3 times in that paragraph. Okay? Deal with one source at a time. If you have to, kind of do this is my biography paragraph and then fix the topic sentence later, right? But then 2 to 3 times, probably closer to 3. Having looked at a lot of these, the 3s tend to turn out a little more well developed than the 2s, but definitely 2 to 3. Now, please keep in mind that while facts about the author don't need to be quoted, they do need to be cited. So an in-text citation and a signal phrase are still needed. Like, this website tells us that Alice Walker was born in 1945 or 68 or 52 or whenever she was born. That does need to have the article tells us that signal phrase, and it needs a citation. If you didn't know it before you read it, it needs a citation. Okay? Now, Alice Walker is an American author who wrote The Color Purple. We all know that, right? we all know that. Alice Walker is an African American author. Doesn't need citation. Anybody who's awake and breathing and reading stuff knows that, okay? But if you didn't know it before you read the article, it needs a signal phrase to tell me that the article told you this, and it needs a citation for what paragraph that came from. Yes? Okay, so facts and statistics. If you're talking about a statistic in your historical thing, like the Alien and Sedition Act of 1919 was overturned in the 1930s, I need a citation for that. You didn't know that till you read it, right? If you're saying at this time there was 45% unemployment rate among African Americans, I'm gonna need a citation for that, right? So make sure that any facts or statistics that you didn't know before you read your source get attributed to your source in your words and get a citation. And remember, with your biography and history, we're using that source paragraph format where it's a topic sentence. You carefully introduce your source. There's a website from this organization and there's an article on Amy Tan, right? And it's written by this person. And you give me some sentences introducing the source, and then you use your source, right? Please don't start pretending this information came out of nowhere. This is literally a research paper. Pretending you didn't read anything is not the approach, right? You're supposed to be showing how good you are at talking about sources, not magically knowing information, right? So make sure that you're slowing down to introduce any source before you use it, right? I should know who's saying what in every paragraph. Now, you just got out of your close reading, and that was all about the author. Now we're going into that source paragraph thing where you have a topic sentence, you introduce your source real carefully, you integrate a quote, you provide a citation, you analyze the importance of the quote, and then you do another quote or two, right? But we're doing that 5-step source use process here. Does that make sense? Hot dog. All right. That was a really good question, D'Angelo. Somebody had a question at the same time as D'Angelo. Who is that? Oh, no, I'm sorry, Asia. If it comes back to you, please let me know. Okay, does anybody else have questions? Yeah, remember, yeah, I mean, spacing out with some of your own analysis in between. Like, you know, I would think this, you're going to give me a fact and then you've got to tell me why I should care, right? And the telling me why I should care should break it up a little. Does that make sense? All right, so don't forget to tell me why I should care after everything you tell me about the author or about the cultural context or about the history, okay? The so what after each piece of information is an essential part of what makes this your essay instead of just a giant book report. Nobody wants to read just a giant book report. You're supposed to be analyzing this and making connections to the story, right? Give a fact and then connect it to the story, right? If you tell me she was writing started writing in the 1970s or went to college in the 1970s, connect that to the story, right? If you're talking about Gilman undergoing the rest cure, take a minute to connect that to the story, right? And I think that'll help you balance the here's from the source, here's what I think. You're just always going back and forth, okay? And that's why that 5th step of source use, that analysis of the fact or statistic or the quote, is so important, okay? All right, other questions? These have been good questions. Let's take a look at the sample essay and how it deals with some of these, how it deals with the author paragraph and how it deals with like the cultural context paragraph, right? So let me do a screen share and let's take a look at the sample essay, okay? I just gotta find it. Hold on. Visible short story reading set. Sample student essay was in week 6. So right at the beginning, and I keep going back to it. So make sure that you've at least saved that to your computer so that you can refer to it again and again. Okay. All right. Are you able to see the Word document? Or are you seeing a blue screen or something else? Are you able to see the Word document?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so this is a piece, this is a paragraph that deals with the cultural context, and they're looking at that Ferris State University site that a lot of you found, which is really great. The 1910s was a time of severe racism and prejudice. Again, not a perfect paper. We see some things to edit there, but breathe. Everybody will have mistakes that they wish weren't there. You can still succeed. This student did. During this time, African Americans were forced to fight in battle royales. Ferris State University, a notable four-year college, published an article called Negro Battle Royale. This article breaks down what battle royales were, who fought in them, and why they fought in them. Battle royales were brutal and a complete mockery of the African American people used for entertainment. The article states, and then he gives his quote and his citation, and then he analyzes. Not only were these fights brutal and a mockery, but African Americans who fought in them were not paid well at all. The article shows, and then he goes on, he says that payment is hardly worth the pain and humiliation and shows that the fighters were being exploited. Now, we could improve this paragraph by connecting it to the character in our story who was exploited here at the very end. That would be even better. He could have had patience for a third quote, but he did a really good job here talking about that source. All right, so make sure you're reading that sample essay. It's there to help you. Just don't plagiarize it. Okay. Now, this is one where he talks about the biography, and he actually does a really good job. He says, the life Ralph Ellison lived shows why he would write about race issues and African American voices being heard. Contemporary authors online published a biography about Ralph Ellison. The biography tells about Ellison's life and his works. The articles, I love how patient he's being with introducing his source. That's one of the reasons I chose this as a sample essay, is that he's so patient in telling me about the website, in telling me about the article, and telling me what it's about. He's just so patient with it, and that's what I love about this so much. The article states that growing up in Oklahoma, a frontier state that had no tradition of slavery, and where relations, so he's going on, it's kind of a long quote. I would say this quote could have been paraphrased some of it and then used just the very end of it where it says Ralph Ellison became conscious of his obligation to explore the full range of American Negro humanity and to affirm those qualities. I think he only needs that second half. And that was some of my comments to him when I critiqued this essay, is that he's got like a 6-line quote here and he only needs a 2-line quote, right? So paraphrase and summarize the parts that you could not say better yourself. But then he says Ellison felt that because where he grew up was more human, that he could explore and show people that African Americans and other races were equal. Throughout Ellison's life, he wrote many works addressing race relations, and then he quotes the article again. The article asserts comma quote, citation, and then he's got some good analysis here, and he says, shadow and act that should be in quotations, isn't his only piece, P-I-E-C-E, of work discussing race. He also discusses it in Invisible Man, Juneteenth, and some other works. So he does a good job. Again, this top quote is a little too long. Maybe 3 shorter quotes would have been better, but he's really patient in introducing his source. He makes sure that everything he shares about the author connects to what he's trying to argue about the piece that he's talking about. And that's what we really like there. And then he gets into the literary criticism. Okay, so I'm going to stop our share. Having seen that, do you have questions about what your goal is? Yes, ma'am. Right. We're not doing the lit crit this week. We're writing just these 3. Okay. Biography, cultural context, and history. The ones where the sources, we've found them already and agreed on what the approved sources are. Okay, good. Now, those aren't going to be your first 3 paragraphs in the essay. You wrote the first 3 paragraphs of your essay for last week, which is going to be your thesis and your close reading paragraphs. That's how we start out. And then we'll move to these, and then we'll end with literary criticism, and then we'll wrap it all up. Okay, so we're literally building this one section at a time, and probably week 12 is when we'll turn it in and be done. Yay! But you'll have had feedback on all the parts of it. Okay? All right. Questions? I'll look and see if it feels awkward. And if it feels awkward, I'll give you permission to reformulate it to sound less stilted, repetitious, or whatever. Remember, that's why we're doing a draft. So if it turned out weird, we'll fix it. I don't want you to sound awkward and formulaic. So if it is formulaic, we'll change it. But let me take a look at it. It might, I mean, in some ways, the literary analysis is a bit of a form to fill out. And I'd rather you had and hit the form real obviously at this level. And when you get to the 200 level, then you can kind of smooth it out a little bit. But when I was teaching at UAB, I had colleagues who, if they didn't see that formula of a thesis statement, would flunk the paper. Like they would read the first paragraph, not see that formula, and just give it a 0. So my first job teaching at this community college is to make sure that when you transfer to UAB, that doesn't happen, because you know how to put that formulaic thesis statement in there crystal clear, right? Does that make sense? You got scary people coming at you. So yeah, and then then they'll work with you on the nuance of it, but they'll flunk you if it's not there. Does that make sense? She has since retired, but I don't know who replaced her and if they're just as crazy, so I want to make sure you're prepared. All right. Other questions? All right, so this week we're going to have a discussion board. What are you putting in the discussion board? Right. So the 2 on your source, and then the 1 on the other source. And I did that so that the people working on Walker were looking up an extra one on Tan, and the people on Tan were looking an extra one up about Walker. I did that very specifically. So there's nobody who's doing just 2. Everybody is doing 2 plus 1 extra for somebody else to use. Does that make sense? Okay. So mostly working for you, but also a little bit of cooperative work helping out somebody else with the source that they might not have seen. Does that make sense? Fantastic. Okay. We're going to have a discussion board. We're going to have an assignment. The assignment is a 3-paragraph assignment, just like last week. Yay. And then we're going to do next week, I'll just give you a little preview. Next week, we're going to write about our 2 AVL sources and give a first stab at our works cited list. All right. Questions?